The late afternoon sun hung heavy over the sprawling grounds of the Voss estate, its manicured gardens and stone fountains shimmering in the golden light. A subtle tension floated in the air, woven between the clinking of champagne glasses and the murmured conversations of New England's old money elite. The annual Voss Foundation Charity Garden Party was less about charity and more about visibility, a careful ballet of appearances, alliances, and whispered deals beneath the guise of benevolence. Rosa Daniels moved quietly between the guests, balancing a silver tray laden with glasses of sparkling water. The housekeepers and serving staff wore matching pale blue uniforms, crisp and starched, designed to blend into the scenery. Rosa, a tall, dignified black woman in her early 40s, kept her eyes low, her face composed in the way of someone long practiced in the art of invisibility. She knew how these gatherings went, the snide comments just out of earshot, the unsolicited advice about how lucky she was to work for such a respectable family, the pointed disregard for her humanity. Somewhere on the fringes of the lawn, under the shade of a centuries-old elm, Rosa's son Malik sat alone with a worn paperback book in his lap. He was 12, slight for his age, with deep brown skin and a mop of tight, untamed curls. His hands, long-fingered and restless, turned the pages eagerly as he studied the annotated moves of a 1972 chess match between Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky. The book was a second-hand find, its corners frayed, but to Malik it might as well have been a map to another world. It was precisely this sight, the child so at ease in solitude, absorbed in a pursuit meant for men twice his age and status, that drew the attention of Harrison Voss. At 68, Voss was the patriarch of the Voss estate, a man with the brittle charm of inherited power. His wealth wasn't earned so much as preserved, passed down like a family heirloom. He wore his privilege like a tailored suit, with no thought for those crushed beneath its weight. He spotted Rosa in the distance, carrying her tray toward a cluster of guests, and a cruel flicker crossed his face. "Miss Daniels," he called out, his voice silk over stone. Conversations paused, all heads turned. Rosa's stomach tightened. She moved toward him, managing a practiced smile. "Yes, Mr. Voss? Your boy," he said, gesturing toward Malik with a gloved hand. "Does he know the rules of chess, or is that just for show?" Rosa's mouth went dry. "He plays, sir," she replied carefully. "Plays, does he?" Voss chuckled, eliciting polite laughter from the guests surrounding him. "Well then, we mustn't let his talents go to waste. Let's see what the lad's made of." The words were not an invitation but a spectacle, a public jest disguised as benevolence. The chessboard, a beautifully crafted heirloom with ivory and onyx pieces, sat atop a marble table under a linen canopy. The estate's guests gathered quickly, drawn by the promise of amusement. Here was entertainment of the oldest kind, the powerful humiliating the powerless. Rosa's pulse thundered in her ears. She caught Malik's gaze and saw the question in his eyes. "Stay where you are," she silently willed him. But Malik, sensing a challenge beneath the layers of mockery, closed his book and rose to his feet. He approached the table with a quiet grace, his slim frame dwarfed by the heavy, carved chairs. The guests made space, a circle forming around the boy and the millionaire. Some faces wore faint smirks. Others observed with the detached curiosity reserved for unusual animals at the zoo. "Come, boy," Voss said, gesturing for Malik to sit across from him. "Show me what you've learned." Rosa clenched the tray tighter, every instinct in her body screaming to shield her child from what was about to happen. But she knew too well how these games worked. To intervene would mean both their livelihoods. In this world, dignity was currency she couldn't afford to spend. Malik slid into the chair, his small hands resting lightly on the table's edge. He scanned the board as Voss casually reset the pieces. The boy's dark eyes flicked over the layout. King, queen, rooks, bishops, knights, pawns, cataloging each square, each possibility. "White or black, young man?" Voss asked, his tone light. "Black," Malik replied without hesitation. The guests chuckled, an audacious choice, Voss raised a brow, intrigued despite himself, and made the first move. Pawn to e4. Malik responded instantly, without glancing at his book, pushing his pawn to e5. The game began. At first, the crowd watched in mild amusement. Harrison Voss was known for his chess prowess, having boasted at countless dinners of the men he'd bested, judges, senators, and CEOs. This, then, was supposed to be a lesson, a spectacle of dominance. But within 6 moves, the atmosphere shifted. Malik's replies came swiftly, his moves not reactive but predictive. With each piece he advanced, he subtly undermined Voss's strategy. His play wasn't defensive, nor was it reckless. It was surgical, calculated. A ripple of murmurs spread through the gathering. Rosa, still clutching her tray, noticed the way the laughter died down, replaced by uneasy silence. "Boys got a head for the game," one guest muttered. "I thought this was supposed to be funny," another whispered. By the 10th move, Malik had forced Voss into a corner, claiming his queen with a brutal precision. The millionaire's face flushed a deep crimson. "Beginner's luck," Voss grunted, resetting his jaw. Malik met his gaze and said softly, "You left your queen unprotected, sir?" A few guests stifled gasps. Malik's voice was steady, unafraid. He wasn't mocking. He was stating fact. But in a place where truth was currency only the powerful could afford, the boy's words landed like a thrown stone in still water. Rosa's breath caught in her throat. If this story of injustice and transformation moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that turn pain into power. The chessboard between Malik and Harrison Voss had become the axis around which the entire garden party now turned. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn, but no one moved to leave. Champagne glasses were abandoned half full on marble side tables. Conversations about investments, art auctions, and political endorsements were replaced by a collective, uneasy attention fixed on the boy whose very presence defied the unspoken rules of this world. Harrison Voss's smile had hardened into a tight line. His hand hovered over a knight, fingers trembling imperceptibly before he pulled it back and moved a pawn instead. It was a weak move, meant to buy time, a stalling tactic. Malik immediately countered, pushing a bishop into a commanding position that cut off several of Voss's potential escapes. A murmur passed through the circle of onlookers. Not laughter now, nor polite curiosity, but something darker. The rules were being rewritten, and it unsettled them. A black Maid son was not supposed to unseat a man like Harrison Voss, not even in a game. Especially not in front of the men who funded political campaigns, sat on boards, and pulled invisible strings in city government. "Impressive," drawled Victor Langley, a silver-haired banker known for his ruthless consolidations. "The boy's been coached." Rosa, standing stiffly to the side, felt the sting of those words. Not a compliment, but a suspicion. A talent like Malik's couldn't simply exist. It had to be explained, owned, or dismissed. Harrison forced a chuckle. "Nothing wrong with a little beginner's luck, Victor. I'll have him in checkmate by—" "You won't," Malik said softly. The words landed with the force of a slap. The air seemed to constrict. Guests exchanged glances, unsure whether to laugh, reprimand, or feign deafness. Voss straightened, his eyes narrowing. "Is that so, young man?" Malik didn't look away. "Your next move leaves your king vulnerable to a 2-move mate." The audacity of it was staggering. A boy barely tall enough for the chair, speaking with the authority of a grandmaster. And worse, he was right. "Is that a fact?" Voss's voice was brittle. Malik reached for one of the ivory pieces and moved it with a quiet finality. "Now you have one option left. Move your rook." The guests leaned in. Even those with only a passing knowledge of chess could sense the momentum had shifted irreversibly. Voss stared at the board. He knew the move Malik suggested was a trap, the kind a clever child might hope an adult would fall into. But another glance revealed no better alternative. His remaining options led to certain defeat in fewer moves. With a muttered curse, Voss slid his rook across the board. Malik didn't hesitate. His hand darted out, moving a queen into position. "Check," Malik announced, his voice steady. The guests collectively inhaled. The billionaire's face darkened, his carefully curated composure slipping. Victor Langley raised a brow. Catherine Ellison, whose family money predated railroads, pursed her lips. "What's your name, boy?" Voss asked, voice low. "Malik Daniels." "Malik," Voss repeated as if tasting something unpleasant. "Do you know who I am?" Malik didn't blink. "Yes, sir." Voss leaned back, forcing a grin. "Then you know it's bad form to embarrass your host." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Malik, his gaze unwavering, said, "It's not my fault you missed the trap, sir." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the gathering. It was the kind of moment that, in a different time and place, might have ended with a beating, or worse. But here, in front of cameras and witnesses in tailored suits, violence wasn't an option. Reputation was currency, and Voss had just lost a small fortune's worth. Rosa felt her legs weaken, her heart pounding so violently she thought she might collapse. She wanted to intervene, to snatch Malik away and leave this cursed place behind. But she also saw what was happening, what her son was doing. He wasn't simply winning a game. He was making a statement none of them would forget. A figure detached from the crowd, Samuel Ortega, a retired chess master and former coach for the national team. He approached the table with an expression of cautious admiration. "Forgive the interruption, Mr. Voss," Ortega said, bowing his head slightly, "but I believe the boy is correct. This match is instructive." Voss's nostrils flared. "I don't recall asking for commentary. And yet," Ortega continued smoothly, "I believe history will." The comment landed with a weight far greater than its delivery. A few guests quietly murmured in agreement. It was clear to all now. Malik wasn't a parlor trick nor a coached novelty. He was something else. Something dangerous to men like Voss, not because of the game, but because of what it revealed. That talent, brilliance, and power could be born anywhere. That the boundaries between servant and master, pawn and king, existed only because those in power agreed to pretend they were unbreakable. Malik leaned forward, moving his last piece. "Checkmate," he said. And it was. Perfect, elegant, unarguable. Silence reigned. Not a polite, expectant hush, but a heavy, suffocating stillness. Voss sat back in his chair, his face a mask of fury and humiliation. His guests didn't rush to his side. Some stepped back, others began murmuring, a few discreetly slipping away toward the estate's inner rooms. Rosa exhaled a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Her son had crossed an invisible line, and the world, or at least this small poisonous corner of it, had felt it. What happened next would decide whether Malik's brilliance would be celebrated, buried, or exploited. And Rosa already knew these men rarely missed an opportunity to turn genius into a possession. The aftermath of the checkmate lingered in the air like the heavy scent of blooming hydrangeas, clinging to the edges of every conversation, every wary glance. Harrison Voss remained seated at the chessboard, his face frozen in a brittle mask of civility, though the tautness in his jaw betrayed him. Around him, the gilded circle of socialites and heirs moved uneasily, their murmured conversations carrying the sharp, acrid edge of scandal. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Voss cleared his throat, an ugly, forced smile creeping across his face. "Well played, young man," he said, each word brittle as splintered glass. He gestured toward Malik with a wide sweep of his hand, addressing the gathered guests. A reminder that genius, it seems, can bloom in the most unexpected of gardens. The words hung, poisonous and sweet. Laughter rippled through the crowd, brittle and relieved. They didn't know what else to do. To challenge Voss openly would be social suicide. To ignore what had happened felt equally dangerous. So, they laughed. Rosa stiffened as the sound reached her. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. She recognized the laughter. It wasn't joy or admiration, it was the laughter of people disguising fear as amusement, who would sooner smother what they couldn't control than celebrate it. And then Malik spoke. "You play well, Mr. Voss," he said, his voice steady, clear. "But you rely too much on old openings. The world's changed." For a moment you could have heard the grass bend beneath the weight of the evening air. The boy didn't say it with defiance, nor did he couch it in apology. He spoke it as a fact, one as natural as the movement of sun to dusk, and that made it all the more unbearable. Harrison Voss laughed, a brittle, humorless sound, and rose from his chair. "Perhaps you're right, boy," he said, placing a heavy hand on Malik's shoulder, his fingers squeezing just a fraction too tightly. "Which is why talent like yours needs proper guidance." Rosa stepped forward instinctively, but another figure was already moving. Samuel Ortega, the retired chess master who'd witnessed the game's final moves, placed himself between Rosa and the table, his expression unreadable. "If you'll permit me, Mr. Voss," Ortega began, voice smooth as polished oak, "I'd like a word with the young man, purely professional interest." Voss's smile tightened. He could sense the shift. This was no longer a private parlor game he could command. The eyes on him now carried weight, the weight of public perception, of reputations, of future headlines. He released Malik's shoulder. "Of course," Voss said, waving magnanimously. "By all means. Let's not squander the evening's entertainment." Malik slid off his chair, and Rosa was by his side in 2 long strides, her hand on his shoulder, pulling him gently but firmly toward her. "Sir," she said to Voss, her voice cool and clipped, a quiet power in its restraint, "thank you for your kindness." It wasn't gratitude, it was a warning, and Voss, for all his arrogance, heard it. Ortega gestured toward a quieter corner of the lawn, beneath the wisteria-draped trellis. "Come, Malik, let's have a talk." They walked away, Malik casting one last glance at the chessboard, its pieces still frozen in the posture of defeat. Rosa followed closely. The guests, sensing the shift, began to disperse in little knots of murmuring speculation. Already Rosa could hear the spin beginning. "Well, you have to admire the boy's nerve. And natural talent is one thing, but without the right schooling, what becomes of it?" She knew what would come next. Offers disguised as opportunities, contracts dressed in velvet, designed to claim ownership. Her son was no longer a boy to them, no longer Malik Daniels. He was a commodity. A prize to be managed, displayed, and controlled. Under the trellis, Ortega knelt so he could look Malik in the eye. "You knew you'd beat him, didn't you?" the old man asked quietly. Malik hesitated, then nodded. "When I saw his opening, yeah." Ortega smiled, but there was sadness in it. "You're not just good, boy. You're better than half the national team. Who taught you?" "My mom," Malik said simply, glancing up at Rosa. Ortega's brows lifted. "Your mother?" Rosa shook her head. "I don't play. Not chess, he taught himself, library books, old matches online, any chance he could get. It's in him." Ortega regarded her for a long moment, then turned back to Malik. "There's a tournament next month. State invitational. Winners get scouted for scholarships, sponsorships. I can get you in." Rosa stiffened. She'd heard the word sponsorship before. It often meant a contract so tight you couldn't breathe without permission. "Under one condition," Ortega added, raising a hand to forestall her. "No one owns you, not me, not them. You play for yourself." Malik's eyes gleamed. It wasn't about trophies. It was about playing on his terms. Rosa's heart ached with a mix of fear and pride. "I'll think about it," she said, though in her bones she already knew the answer. A shadow fell across them. Harrison Voss stood a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "I'd like a word with the boy's mother," he said smoothly. Ortega's gaze hardened. "Another time, Harrison." "No," Rosa said, stepping forward. "I'll hear him." She wasn't afraid anymore. Voss inclined his head, the predator sensing unfamiliar terrain. A talent like your son shouldn't be wasted in obscurity. I'm prepared to offer full tuition, private tutoring, and housing at the estate. Imagine what he could become here, under my care." Rosa's lip curled. Under my care. It wasn't a gift. It was a leash. "I appreciate the offer," Rosa said, her voice ice-edged. "But Malik won't be anyone's property." The words struck with a finality even Voss couldn't ignore. Around them, guests still lingering in the twilight caught the exchange. Whispers resumed. The old man's influence wasn't what it had once been. "We'll see," Voss murmured, turning away. And in that moment, Rosa knew they had crossed a line no one could uncross. The next move was theirs. Night had fallen by the time the last of the guests left the Voss estate, their chauffeurs' cars pulling away down the winding gravel drive in discreet procession. The garden's glow softened into shadows, lanterns flickering as servants quietly cleared away half-empty champagne flutes and untouched hors d'oeuvres. The chessboard still sat beneath the linen canopy, its defeated pieces abandoned in their final positions like casualties of an old war. Inside the main house, the mood had shifted. What had begun as an elegant evening of indulgence was now tainted by something sour, a ripple beneath the surface none of them could fully name, but all instinctively felt. Malik's victory had cracked open the carefully maintained facade of hierarchy, and though no one spoke of it aloud, it sat in every corner of the room, thick as smoke. In the west drawing room, Harrison Voss poured himself a glass of brandy. The amber liquid trembled slightly in the glass, though his hand appeared steady. He stared at the flames in the marble hearth, his mind reeling, not from the game itself. He could accept a lost match, but from what it represented. He had always known the rules. The rich dictated the terms, the powerful controlled the narrative, and those born below their station stayed there unless summoned upward by the benevolence of men like him. But this boy, this Malik Daniels, had skipped the part where permission was granted. And worse, the guests had seen it. Victor Langley's face, smug in its polite disapproval. Catherine Ellison's sudden interest in Malik's schooling. Even Ortega, the old fool, emboldened by the boy's talent. Voss could already hear the conversations that would follow in country clubs and private dining rooms across the city. A prodigy, they'd say. One of ours? No, the maid's boy. It wasn't just humiliation, it was contagion. He needed to reassert control. Meanwhile, in the small servants' quarters beyond the main house, Rosa packed their few belongings into a canvas tote. Malik sat on the edge of the narrow bed, his hands still restless, ghostly tracing the air as if playing through unseen moves on an invisible board. "You were incredible," Rosa murmured without turning. Her voice cracked as the words left her lips. Malik glanced up. "I wasn't trying to cause trouble, Mama." "I know, baby." But she also knew that trouble was inevitable. Malik wasn't ordinary. She'd seen it since he was 5, how numbers and patterns seemed to reveal themselves to him like old friends. He solved puzzles meant for adults, memorized entire chess matches after a single viewing. And now the wrong people had noticed. A quiet knock at the door made them both tense. It opened to reveal Samuel Ortega, his lined face solemn but kind. "I figured you might want to leave before morning," he said, stepping inside. In his hand, he held a slim, leather-bound book. Rosa straightened. "We plan to. I'm glad." He extended the book toward Malik. "It's a copy of Capablanca's best matches. Belonged to my mentor. Thought you should have it." Malik accepted it reverently. "Thank you." "I meant what I said," Ortega continued. "There's a state invitational next month. I can get you a seat, no sponsors, no strings. Just you and the board." Rosa's instinct was to say no, to protect Malik from further exposure. But she caught the look in her son's eyes, the quiet fire, the hunger for something larger than what this life had given him. "We'll think about it," she said carefully. Ortega nodded. "You'll have to decide soon." Men like Voss don't let go of things they think they own. The warning settled like a stone between them. In the main house, Harrison Voss summoned his attorney and personal advisor, Julian Pierce. A tall, lean man with prematurely silver hair, Pierce was the kind of fixer who rarely spoke unless absolutely necessary. "I want everything on that boy," Voss growled, pacing the room. "School records, medical history, financial situation. If his mother's hiding debts, I want to know. If the kid's been skipping school, find it." Pierce hesitated. "Sir, if I may, the optics of this could be challenging." "Don't lecture me about optics," Voss snapped. "You don't let a fire spread because you're afraid of the smoke." Pierce inclined his head. "I'll see what can be arranged." He left the room without another word. Voss drained his brandy and stared out the tall windows toward the servants' quarters. He saw a figure moving in the darkness. Rosa, carrying the canvas tote. The boy followed behind, clutching something to his chest. Good, Voss thought. Let them run. Let them think they've escaped. But the truth was, the rules hadn't changed. Not really, not yet, and he would remind them of that soon enough. Outside, Rosa led Malik down the gravel path toward the old workers' gate. She'd called in a favor. A cab would be waiting by the road. They moved quickly, shadows swallowing them whole. As they neared the gate, Malik clutched the leather book tighter. "Mama?" "Yeah, baby. I don't want to hide anymore." Rosa stopped, kneeling in front of him. "I know," she whispered, "and you won't. Not forever. But sometimes we gotta play the long game, understand?" Malik met her eyes, and something older than his years flickered there. A knowing. A resolve. He nodded. The cab's headlights appeared in the distance. And in that moment, as they stepped through the gate and into the uncertain dark, Rosa realized something that made her chest ache with a fierce, impossible pride. They hadn't lost. Not tonight. Because Voss's world only knew how to beat you by the rules they wrote. Malik had made his own, and the game had only just begun. The morning after the garden party, a brittle hush fell over the Voss estate. Even the usual bustle of the staff was subdued, as if the very walls of the mansion had absorbed the tension from the night before. Servants exchanged wary glances, conversations reduced to murmurs behind closed kitchen doors. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a storm. Rosa Daniels awoke in a small guest-house room lent to her for the night by Samuel Ortega. The walls were thin, the mattress lumpy, but after the previous evening's events, it felt like a sanctuary. Malik slept curled at her side, the leather-bound book Ortega had given him cradled against his chest like a relic. Rosa watched him for a long while, memorizing the rise and fall of his chest, the childlike softness in his features that belied the fire within. She'd raised him to be cautious, to recognize the invisible lines drawn by men like Harrison Voss, lines that weren't meant to be crossed, lest you pay in blood or ruin. And yet Rosa had always known Malik wouldn't abide by those rules. He wasn't built for invisibility. When Malik stirred awake, his dark eyes blinking into the dim light, Rosa placed a hand gently on his cheek. "You okay, baby?" He nodded, though his gaze was distant, already replaying moves in his mind, mapping out the consequences of last night's game far beyond the chessboard. "I don't want to go back to the estate," he murmured. "You won't," Rosa promised. Not ever again, but she knew it wasn't that simple. Harrison Voss wouldn't let this humiliation pass unanswered. Rosa had witnessed men like him retaliate in ways that never made the papers but left scars all the same. Careers ended, families evicted, rumors spread like fire through polite society. Power didn't need to announce itself to crush you. It simply closed the doors you didn't even know you were hoping would open. A knock at the guest house door startled them both. Rosa stiffened, her pulse spiking, but a familiar voice called softly, "It's Ortega." She opened the door to find the old chess master standing there with 2 styrofoam cups of coffee and a small brown bag. "Breakfast," he offered with a smile, though his eyes betrayed the same exhaustion Rosa felt. Inside, they sat around the tiny table while Malik wolfed down a pair of warm pastries. I made some calls this morning, Ortega said quietly. The invitational next month. It's still open. I spoke with the director, told her about Malik. She's willing to let him compete. No sponsor needed, just a parent's signature. Rosa frowned. And what's the catch? No catch. Ortega sighed. But there's heat coming from the Voss camp already. Word's out, he's furious. Let him be furious, Rosa muttered. Ortega hesitated, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded newspaper. The front page of the local society section bore a headline that made Rosa's stomach twist. Servant's son, stuns Voss at charity gala, prodigy or parlor trick. Below the headline, a photograph captured the moment Malik called checkmate. Harrison Voss's face, red and contorted with fury, was frozen mid-grimace. Malik looked calm, almost regal, his hand resting on the chessboard like a king surveying a conquered territory. Rosa read the accompanying text and felt the blood drain from her face. The article painted Malik's victory as an amusing anomaly, the boy's talent as little more than an amusing accident. A curiosity. It questioned whether Rosa had coached him, implied that the child's natural ability was suspect. They're already trying to take it from him, she whispered. They always do, Ortega said grimly. But there's another option. He slid a business card across the table. It bore the name of a journalist Rosa vaguely recognized, Ava Sinclair, an independent reporter known for exposing corruption in elite social circles. She wants to talk to you, Ortega said. Off the record for now. She was at the party, saw what happened. Rosa hesitated. What's the risk? The same as always, Ortega replied. Truth makes powerful men nervous, but it's the only thing that keeps them honest. She studied the card. She'd spent years protecting Malik by staying invisible, but maybe it was time for another strategy. She wasn't sure yet. A mother's instinct was to shield, but Malik wasn't a child to be sheltered anymore. He was already at war with a system that would never claim him willingly. I'll think about it, she said finally, tucking the card into her pocket. As Ortega left, Rosa took Malik's hand. Baby, listen to me. What you did last night, that wasn't just a chess game. That was you showing them you won't stay where they put you. Malik looked up at her, his expression both ancient and innocent. Do I have to go to that tournament, Mama? No, she said. You don't have to do anything you don't want. But if you want to play, really play, not just to win a trophy, but to show 'em you're not scared, then yeah, I think you should. Malik was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. I want to play. Rosa kissed his forehead. Then we'll find a way. She knew there'd be backlash, threats, maybe worse. But Rosa Daniels had lived long enough to understand that some lines deserved to be crossed, especially for a son who saw the world not in terms of power and privilege, but moves and counter-moves. The long game was hers to play now, and she didn't intend to lose. The estate's library had always been Harrison Voss's favorite room, a high-ceilinged chamber lined with first editions and leather-bound volumes that hadn't been read in decades, their presence more symbolic than practical. It was a room meant for closing deals, for issuing quiet threats between brandy refills, and for reminding guests of their comparative insignificance. It was there, 2 days after the garden party, that Rosa Daniels was summoned. The message came through the estate's housekeeper, terse and perfunctory. Mr. Voss requests your presence. Immediately. Rosa considered refusing. Ortega had already offered them a safe place, and the cab fare to leave town by sundown. But something in her, a mixture of fury and wearied resolve, told her to face the storm head-on. She wouldn't run from men like Harrison Voss. Not this time. She left Malik under the watchful eye of Ortega's niece, a nursing student named Lisette, then made her way back to the estate, the air thick with late summer heat and the scent of scorched grass. Every step up the grand stone staircase felt heavier, as if the old house itself sought to remind her of her place, She was led into the library by Pierce, Voss's legal advisor, who regarded her with the kind of polite disdain reserved for the help. Harrison Voss stood at the window, his back to them, staring out at the chessboard still set up under the linen canopy outside. The pieces hadn't been touched since Malik's checkmate. "Ms. Daniels," Voss began without turning, "thank you for coming." "I wasn't given much choice," Rosa replied evenly. He turned then, his face composed, though his eyes betrayed a venomous gleam. "Let's not pretend we don't both know what this is about." Rosa folded her arms. "My son beat you at a game you thought would humiliate him. Now you're trying to salvage your pride." A muscle twitched in Voss's jaw. "It wasn't humiliation," he said with forced calm. "It was unexpected, a curiosity, and I intend to see that talent is properly directed." "I'll handle my son's future," Rosa shot back. Voss moved toward a table where a folder lay open. "I've made arrangements," he continued, lifting out a document. "A full scholarship, private schooling at St. James Academy, personal tutors, chess coaching from world-ranked players. Your family will move into a cottage on my property, rent-free. Malik will have access to resources boys like him could only dream of." Rosa didn't touch the paper. "And what's the price?" Voss's expression tightened. "You'll sign over guardianship for the duration of his enrollment, just a formality to secure legal oversight. He'll be part of my household." It was worse than she'd imagined. Not an opportunity, a leash, a contract masquerading as salvation. "And if I refuse?" Rosa asked, though she already knew. Voss gestured to Pierce, who slid another document across the table. "You'll find yourself without employment in this county. No school will take Malik. I have friends on every board. Ortega's favor won't protect you forever." Rosa stared at the papers, a lifetime of exhaustion crashing down on her. It wasn't new. Black women like her had lived under the weight of men like this for generations. Offers cloaked as opportunities, threats disguised as kindness. She inhaled slowly. "You're right," she said quietly. Voss raised a brow. "You do have power and connections, and I don't doubt you could make our lives hard." She met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "But you're making a mistake." "And what's that?" he asked, a cold smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You're still playing by old rules. Thinking control comes with a checkbook and a contract." Rosa leaned in. "But my son's not a commodity, and you don't own the story that started the night he beat you. It's already out there. People saw it. People are talking. And you, Harrison Voss, are not the man you used to be." Voss's face darkened. Before he could respond, a voice interrupted them from the doorway. "Actually," said Ava Sinclair, the journalist Ortega had recommended, stepping into the room with a recorder in hand. "This conversation just made for a very interesting story." Pierce moved to block her. "You're trespassing." "I'm a guest of Mr. Ortega," Ava said smoothly. "And as of 5 minutes ago, this estate is no longer private. The Board of Trustees is here, responding to an anonymous tip about irregularities in Voss Foundation donations." Voss went rigid. Rosa felt a fierce, unfamiliar heat in her chest. Not fear, not even relief. It was something like joy, sharp and defiant. "You see," Rosa said, her voice soft but razor-edged, "I didn't come here to bargain. I came to tell you we're leaving. And if you so much as whisper my boy's name again, the next story Ava runs won't be about chess." Ava lifted the recorder with a wry smile. "It'll be about how men like you have built fortunes burying children like him." Pierce paled. Voss didn't move, but Rosa could see the fury simmering in his eyes. He wasn't used to losing, and certainly not to a black woman in a maid's uniform and a boy who spoke through moves on a chessboard. "Go," Voss hissed. Rosa smiled. "Gladly." She turned and left without another word, Ava falling in step beside her. Outside, the air felt cooler, the heavy tension of the mansion left behind. "Did you mean it?" Ava asked quietly as they walked toward the cab waiting by the gate. About keeping Malik out of his reach? Rosa nodded. I'll burn this whole place down before I let them own him. Ava's grin widened. Good, because I have a friend at the Tribune, and they'll want this story. Rosa looked back once at the estate, its imposing windows reflecting the last light of day. The long game wasn't over, but now it was hers to play. The sun was barely rising over the city skyline when Rosa Daniels and Malik arrived at the small cafe on the south side of town. It wasn't much, cracked vinyl booths, faded photographs of jazz greats on the walls, but to Rosa it was neutral ground, the kind of place men like Harrison Voss wouldn't set foot in, and where news traveled quickly, both as protection and warning. They slid into a corner booth where Samuel Ortega was already waiting, 2 cups of coffee steaming in front of him. He looked tired but pleased, his lined face breaking into a grin when he saw Malik. Morning, champ, Ortega greeted, sliding a plate of pancakes across the table to the boy. Heard you ruffled a few feathers. Malik smiled faintly, his eyes dark with exhaustion. More like burned a whole nest. Ortega chuckled. Good. Rosa sat across from him, her expression wary. You sure about this? Voss won't take the loss quietly. I know, Ortega said. Which is why we're not just fighting him alone. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts, names, and records. Turns out this isn't the first time Harrison Voss has tried to snuff out someone he couldn't control. There's a pattern. Students, employees, small business owners, people of color mostly. Quiet payoffs, threats, blacklisted reputations. Ava and I dug it up overnight. Rosa scanned the papers, bile rising in her throat. He owns the town, she muttered. Not anymore, Ortega said. Because we're not staying in town. Rosa looked up sharply. There's a spot for Malik in the state invitational, Ortega continued, and I made some calls to friends, old chess masters, instructors, people who owe me favors. They'll train him, not for a tournament, for life. The kind of training kids like him never get because no one believes they deserve it. Rosa's throat tightened. And what's the price this time? No price, Ortega said firmly. You don't owe me. And you don't owe Ava. We're doing this because it matters. Because if one boy like Malik breaks through, he won't be the last. Malik spoke up, his voice small but unyielding. I want to play. Not for them. For me. Rosa swallowed hard, then nodded. They shook on it. Not a contract, not a debt. A promise. An hour later, Ava Sinclair met them outside the cafe with a rental car, her hair tucked under a ball cap, sunglasses hiding the fire in her eyes. Voss called me twice last night, she said without preamble. Offered to buy the story, then threatened me. That tells me we've got him right where we want him. She handed Rosa a thick envelope. This is a copy of everything we found. Names, records, financial statements. You need to keep it. Insurance. Rosa took it without hesitation. Malik slid into the back seat with his book of chess matches, already lost in imagined moves. Ortega squeezed Rosa's shoulder before turning away, his voice rough. Win or lose, you already beat him. As they pulled away from the curb, Rosa felt something she hadn't in years, a crack of light in the darkness. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Voss still had reach and money, and the kind of connections that could close doors without anyone seeing the handle turn. But Malik was out from under his shadow, and Rosa had allies now. In the weeks that followed, Malik trained with men and women who taught him not just about chess, but about the world beyond the board. About how talent like his had always existed, hidden, denied, exploited, and how to wield it without being consumed. Ava's article dropped a month later, not as a scandal sheet, but as a feature in the Tribune under the headline, The Pawn Who Became a King, Malik Daniels and the Game Old Money Couldn't Rig. It went viral overnight. The story detailed the match, Voss's offer, and the systemic gatekeeping that had kept children like Malik from opportunities that should have been theirs by right. It named names, exposed histories, and dragged skeletons out of ancestral closets. The fallout was immediate. Harrison Voss faced public scrutiny for the first time in decades. Charitable foundations pulled their support. His board demanded explanations. A small but growing wave of staff and former employees came forward, adding fuel to the fire. Voss, for all his wealth, couldn't smother the blaze. And Malik? He took third place in the state invitational. Not because he lacked skill, but because in the final round, he spotted a boy half his age sitting on the sidelines with the same hollow, hungry look he'd worn once. A boy from a cleaning crew, watching the match he'd never been invited to. Malik let the game slip. A deliberate error. Afterward, when the officials asked why, he just smiled. Sometimes you win by breaking their rules. The press didn't know what to make of it. The Chess Federation didn't either, but the kids watching from the margins did, because Malik wasn't playing for a trophy. He was playing for the board itself. And from that day forward, nothing in that world would be quite the same. It didn't take long for the cracks in the old order to widen. By the time Ava Sinclair's article made its second national syndication, the social media tide was irreversibly turning. The story of Malik Daniels wasn't just a local scandal anymore. It was a cultural reckoning. Hashtags like Chaos Checkmate Voss and Let Them Play began to trend, carried not by politicians or celebrities at first, but by teachers, community organizers, parents, and kids who saw themselves in Malik's stubborn, brilliant defiance. Rosa watched it all unfold with a mixture of awe and dread. The story had taken on a life of its own. Bloggers dug up Harrison Voss's financial entanglements, his exclusionary scholarship programs, and his foundation's questionable donation records. Former staff came forward anonymously at first, then publicly. Stories of intimidation, of silenced accusations, and of careers quietly buried began filling message boards and opinion pieces. What had started as a petty act of humiliation, a rich man baiting a maid's son into a public loss, had mutated into a symbol of the rot that lay beneath polished legacies. And while Malik had never asked to be a cause, the world had made him one. On a clear Saturday morning, a community chess tournament was held at a local recreation center. Dozens of children, mostly black and brown, from neighborhoods Voss's foundation had never set foot in, arrived clutching borrowed boards and makeshift clocks. The event was organized in less than a week, funded by small donations and run by volunteers. Malik arrived wearing an old hoodie and the worn cap Ortega had given him, his chess book still tucked under his arm. Rosa hovered by the doorway, anxiety gnawing at her stomach. This wasn't like the state invitational. There were no judges in tailored suits, no silk-robed benefactors sipping wine in the gallery. The stakes here weren't prestige, they were visibility. It was Ava who met them at the door, a wide grin beneath her aviator shades. "Half these kids came because they saw you in the paper," she told Malik. "They know your name." Malik glanced around, taking in the folding tables and mismatched pieces. Some of the boards were drawn on poster board with marker lines. The clocks were mostly stopwatches on loan from track teams, yet the atmosphere crackled with something rare: hope. He slid into a seat opposite a boy no older than 10, his eyes sharp and eager. Malik grinned. "You go first." The matches weren't official, but to the kids clustered around the boards they were everything. Each victory was a refutation, each move an act of quiet rebellion. Malik played match after match, offering tips between turns, pointing out strategies the way Ortega once had for him. Rosa watched him and thought, this is what freedom looks like. A television crew arrived by noon, not one of the major networks, an independent station from the city, but it didn't matter. The footage of Malik, hoodie sleeves pushed to his elbows, coaching kids through endgames while the old guard of the city stewed in their private parlors, was worth more than any polished press conference. Meanwhile, Ava's follow-up exposé dropped online. The house always wins, how wealth shaped the game and the children it left behind. It wasn't about chess anymore. It was about education funding, scholarship biases, and systemic gatekeeping. about how Voss and men like him curated the future, while ensuring the rules always favored their heirs. The article struck like a lightning bolt. Voss's foundation board voted to remove him within the week. His investments, once untouchable, faced scrutiny. City council members who once counted him among their patrons began issuing carefully worded statements about the importance of equity initiatives. Ava texted Rosa the news with a simple message. He blinked. That night, Rosa sat with Malik on the worn couch of the apartment they now rented across town. It was modest. 2 bedrooms, thin walls. But it was theirs. No servants' quarters. No man peering down from a balcony. Just space. "I turned down a sponsor today," Malik murmured, fiddling with one of Ortega's old pawns. "Some academy wanted me on their team. Said they'd fix my formality issues." Rosa's heart clenched. "And?" "I said no." She smiled, brushing a hand through his curls. "Good. Long game, remember?" Malik grinned. "Always." Outside the window, the city lights blurred against the night. Rosa thought about every door that had ever been closed in her face, every indignity swallowed for survival. And she thought about the ones she would pry open now, not just for Malik, but for every child being quietly written out of history before they even had a chance to speak. The world hadn't changed overnight, but something in its bones had shifted, and Malik Daniels had made the first move. Autumn swept through the city in a breath of cool wind and rustling leaves, its crispness carrying a sense of endings and beginnings. The city's elite retreated to their country homes, leaving the marble towers and hushed boardrooms to a quieter hum. But in the corners where the light seldom reached, something irreversible had taken root. Malik Daniels was no longer just a name whispered at chess clubs or among private school headmasters. He was a symbol now, whether he wanted to be or not. His victory at the Voss estate, the exposés, and the community tournaments had created a momentum neither Rosa nor Malik fully anticipated. Invitations arrived weekly, letters embossed in gold leaf, phone calls from foundations promising mentorships, scholarships, international competitions. Every offer came wrapped in honeyed language, but Rosa recognized the bait beneath the sugar. They still wanted to own him, to polish his story into something palatable for their galas and press releases. Malik turned them all down, not out of arrogance but clarity. He knew who those people were now, what they wanted, and more importantly, what they feared. And yet for all the chaos and scandal, one invitation arrived that was different. It was a letter, hand-delivered by a courier Rosa didn't recognize. No letterhead, no emblem. Just thick ivory paper and inked script. "To Malik Daniels, we'd like to invite you to the International Youth Masters exhibition in Chicago. No sponsors, no handlers, no contracts, just the board, the game, and the world watching." At the bottom, a name Rosa did recognize. Viktor Semyonov, the Russian chess legend, long retired and one of the few men alive who could draw a crowd without needing a title. She showed it to Malik over breakfast, watching his face shift from curiosity to cautious excitement. "What do you think?" Rosa asked. Malik traced the letter's edges. "I think it's not a trick." "Why?" "Because he doesn't need me to lose." And Rosa realized he was right. Semyonov's reputation wasn't built on control. It was built on purity of the game. And this invitation wasn't a ploy. It was recognition. A week later, they boarded a train west, Rosa clutching a small suitcase while Malik carried nothing but his old chess book and Ortega's pawn in his pocket. Chicago was colder, busier, its skyscrapers slicing the sky. The tournament hall was nothing like the Voss Estate's garden or the rec center back home. It was sleek, modern, glass and steel, yet absent the suffocating pretense of old money watching from balconies. Here, talent spoke before lineage. On the exhibition's second evening, Malik found himself at a board facing a girl from Mumbai, a quiet prodigy with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. Cameras hovered, reporters scribbled notes, but the two of them barely noticed. For an hour, they moved in silence. The game ended in a stalemate. The room's applause came not from pity or amusement, but from genuine awe. Viktor Semyonov approached the table afterward, leaning down to speak quietly to both players. "You are the future of this game," he said. "And you owe nothing to the ones who kept the board from you." He shook Malik's hand, and for the first time since that night in the garden, Malik felt like a player, not a pawn. Back in their modest hotel room, Rosa received a call from Ava. "You did it," Ava said. "We didn't do anything," Rosa answered. "He did." "Voss sold his estate," Ava added after a beat. "Auctioned it off, the foundation's dissolving." "Seems nobody wants the stain attached." Rosa let the silence stretch, the news settling like a stone at the bottom of a deep well. It was over, at least in the way battles ever truly ended. Later that night, Malik stood at the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. "I keep thinking," he murmured, "about that first game, about how scared I was to win." Rosa stepped behind him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "And now, I'm not scared anymore." He turned to her, his eyes older than his years, and smiled. "I'm just getting started." Rosa pressed a kiss to his temple, her heart full and breaking at the same time. Because the long game wasn't survival anymore. It was legacy. And Malik Daniels had just claimed the board. Winter came heavy that year. The city shivered beneath a blanket of frost, the streets lined with bundled figures and dim-lit windows, as if the world itself was holding its breath. For Rosa Daniels and Malik, it was a season of quiet victories, the kind no headlines chronicled, but whose significance was felt deep, in marrow and memory. The exhibition in Chicago had done more than prove Malik's place among the game's rising talents. It had stripped away the last illusions about where he belonged. No longer a boy invited to tables as a curiosity, Malik Daniels was now sought after for his mind, his discipline, and the magnetic defiance with which he refused to be contained. But Rosa, ever vigilant, knew the cost of early victories. For every door Malik opened, there would be those eager to bolt it behind him, those who would wait until the crowd looked away. That knowledge kept her moving. They returned home to find their city subtly altered. Harrison Voss's estate, the symbol of a dynasty that had weathered a century of scandals and storms, stood empty, the for sale signs on its gates like admission of defeat. The property went to auction a month later. Rumors spread quickly in the way small towns never lost. That a distant relative of Voss's made a half-hearted bid, that the foundation's remaining board members quietly scrubbed his name from every plaque and program. And then came the letter. A thick envelope, hand-addressed to Rosa Daniels, delivered by a courier who left before she could ask questions. Inside, a single-page document, notice of property transfer. The name on the deed wasn't Rosa's, it was Malik's. The final chess move had been made. An anonymous buyer had acquired the Voss estate at auction, later revealed through subtle, careful channels to be a consortium of small investors connected to Ava Sinclair's network, community leaders, and, though she wouldn't admit it outright, Ortega's old chess federation friends. In a stroke of poetic finality, the estate's grounds were slated to become a community education and art center, with the old library converted into a public chess school for underprivileged youth. Rosa sat at the kitchen table that night, letter in hand, Malik across from her fiddling with the now worn pawn Ortega had given him. "They sent it in your name," she said. Malik frowned. "But I didn't buy it." "You didn't have to," Rosa murmured. "It was never really theirs to keep." She slid the deed toward him. Malik read it, then pushed it back. "I don't need it," he said. "You don't," Rosa agreed. "But the kids who'll come after you do." Malik was quiet for a long while, then nodded. "We'll make it a school, a real one. Not just chess, music, science, a place where no one's told who they're supposed to be." Tears prickled at Rosa's eyes, but she blinked them back. Pride and grief occupied the same space in a mother's heart. The next day, A press conference was held on the estate's front lawn. Malik, dressed in a simple button-down shirt and a threadbare jacket, stood at the podium. He spoke plainly, without the flowery rhetoric of politicians, thanking the people who'd fought beside him and those who came before but whose names were forgotten by history. "I didn't win this alone," Malik said. "I didn't even win it for me. I won it because somebody has to move first, so the rest can follow." And follow they did. The chess school opened the following spring, its waiting list filled before the first piece was moved. Rosa oversaw operations, Ava documented its rise, and Ortega trained the next generation of disruptors, boys and girls of every shade and story, finally given a place where brilliance wasn't gatekept behind old money and legacy. The Voss name faded. Whispers of his downfall became a cautionary tale, spoken of in country clubs and boardrooms by men newly cautious about underestimating the hands they once ignored. And Malik? He kept playing, but never for trophies, for justice, for joy, for the long, unbroken line of those denied a seat at the table, now taking the board for themselves. On a mild summer evening years later, Malik would return to the grounds once known as the Voss estate. The chess tables filled the garden where he'd once faced down Harrison Voss. The marble fountain glimmered under soft lights, and children played on the lawns, laughter where once there'd been only brittle, cruel applause. Rosa stood beside him, older now, but her eyes still sharp as glass. "You ever regret not leaving it all behind?" she asked. Malik smiled, watching a young girl deliver a checkmate with an audacious queen's sacrifice. "No," he said. "Some fights you stay for." And in the hush of that evening, as dusk settled like a promise over the land, Rosa knew the game was theirs now. Not just the pieces, the whole damn board. In the end, every story leaves something behind. A trace in the soil, a mark on the walls, a whisper in the names people remember. Malik Daniels' story was no different. It wasn't the trophies or the magazine covers, though those came in time. It wasn't even the estate-turned-school, though its classrooms brimmed with children who might never have dreamed of such a place without him. It was the shift. The moment a boy no one was watching dared to win, not because someone allowed him to, but because he refused not to. The long history of names like Harrison Voss was built on forgetting children like Malik, their brilliance buried beneath polite erasure. But Malik's checkmate wasn't a single move on a chessboard. It was a rupture in the way the world assumed itself unchangeable. For Rosa, it was the quiet moments that mattered most. The mornings Malik rose early to tutor children who reminded him of himself. The long walks across the school grounds where she could breathe without permission. The way the air inside those old, repurposed walls felt different now, cleared of the old, sour weight of inherited power. And for Malik, it was knowing he never belonged to their world. He belonged to the one he helped build. One game, one child, one risk at a time. He learned that brilliance is not enough in a world bent on containment, that it must be wielded, shared, and sometimes sacrificed to make room for others. In the echo of that first humiliating invitation, Malik Daniels had taken their cruel jest and rewritten it into a legacy. Not of possession, but of permission for others to break rules, to cross forbidden lines, and to claim the spaces built to deny them. And in that he was no longer a pawn. He was the hand that moved them all.